Question 3, strategy for English language learners. That would be mostly at Lincoln. The population was mostly native Spanish speakers, English second language. The school had a three-tier system in place. The first tier, kids coming in knowing only Spanish, many of them from Mexico, lots of them illegal. They were taught mostly in Spanish with English being introduced slowly. There was a competency test. When they had tested that, they would move to a class, Tier 2, where they're being instructed both in English and Spanish, with English more and more becoming predominant. By the time they got to me, passing yet another test, Tier 3, they were now supposed to be taught only in English. Now I did spice things up with my poor Spanish. Hablo español, estudio español a la universidad por 3 años. So I know a little bit of Spanish, enough to get by. Strangely enough, parent-teacher conferences, usually the kids came along so that they could translate for the parents, although oftentimes my poor Spanish was good enough. We used mostly PSYOP at my school. Required a lot of pre-teaching work to be done, background, what the students are like. And then what we did is, above the regular dry erase boards, I had 3 mobile boards that I could put up and take down. One of them I would put the lesson plan, what we were doing that day. Another one I would put the content objectives for that lesson. And the third one I would put the language objectives. I always started out with a word search with the vocabulary so that they could look through, find it, give them some time to get comfortable and familiar with the new words, the vocabulary for that particular unit. Oftentimes the things in bold in their textbook, which we tried to point out to them. I would use graphic organizers. I usually wanted them to do a graphic organizer, try and organize things in their own minds. I used word walls. Today, if I were doing it, I would also want to use a Wordle. That's a nice thing where you feed in your lesson and it puts it out in the words that are used the most are big and the words that are used less are small. So I think a Wordle would be cool. We tried to teach Cornell notes, also known as 2-column notes. Not real fond of it myself. I prefer an outline because I think it takes a lot of attention into doing the organizing so that it's hard to keep up with what's being said. I always use a PowerPoint when I'm doing lecture. I'm big on the Socratic method. I like to induce the students to come up with answers themselves by asking them questions. It gives me feedback and helps me know what they're getting and what they aren't. I do things like, for astronomy, I labeled each of the desks with a star, and then I arranged the desks in the room in the constellations. Sometimes I even refer to the students by their star name instead of their name. Again, always start with a search for vocab. I like cooperative learning. Right before we do an assessment, I would always have a round of Jeopardy, and I would take and make several teams, usually 5 or 6 teams, and try and use a little cooperative learning so that not all the smart people were on one team. Try and spread it out, try and discourage one person from answering all of the questions on each team. And that gave me a good idea whether they were ready to test or not. And that was essentially the largest way that I would approach the question of English as a second language. Thank you.